All right, we're going to talk today about lies that your kids are probably going to believe, even though nobody's directly telling them these lies. These are things that we absorb from culture, because nowadays, unlike in the past, like if you lived in a farm culture back in like rural wherever 200 years ago, your kids are exposed to this much of the world's culture. But now it's in the cell phones, and it's in the music, and it's in the YouTubers that they follow, and it's in the TV shows that they watch. And we're consuming so much that I've started calling this world culture because it's like sort of like planetary, internet supplied culture. And to talk to you about the lies that your kids will believe, the things that they will swallow, we're gonna talk to Elizabeth Urbanowicz, who's going to be going through these specific lies. She has a lot of experience dealing with these types of things. She'll tell more about her experience later. But I thought first just say welcome, Elizabeth. This is the Bible Thinker crowd, and Bible Thinker crowd, this is Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on today, Pastor Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to this. Let's just jump straight into it. Then we'll talk more about you and the program you've got and all that other stuff. What is the first lie that you've experienced with kids that you've dealt with?
Yes. So lie number one, and what I would say is most foundational that we have to deal with our kids, is the lie that if I feel it, it must be true. Or just this lie that truth is subjective. And as I started working with kids and really helping them start to think critically and start to think biblically, I was shocked to discover how deeply ingrained this lie is. And the more I have worked with parents and pastors and Christian educators, the more I've seen how shocked they are in not even understanding that our kids have just absorbed this lie from culture. When I first started creating resources for others, I started getting monthly and now weekly emails from others saying, oh my goodness, like I had no idea that here I am teaching my kids the truth. We talk about truth all the time, and they think that the truth isn't true for everyone. Because one of the activities that I give people to do is just, whether it's with the kids at home or at church or in Christian school, is just to ask them the question, is the truth true for everyone? Is the truth true for everyone? And then give the kids a sticky note and have them write down either yes or no, and then a justification for why. Is it true for everyone or is it not? And why do you think that? And parents and pastors and teachers are always shocked that usually more than half the kids in their care say, no, the truth isn't true for everyone. It depends on who you are. And
so just to pause you for a second and tell people a couple things real quick, like do this, if you can, do this with your kids. No pressure. You just ask them and have them write down their answer. Walk them through this. These are the kinds of things you don't know they're believing because they're not expressed outward, but then they really affect worldview. And so we're walking them through this. And Elizabeth has got a lot of experience. This is why, for you guys, I wanted her to come and talk to you about this. She's dealt with hundreds and hundreds of kids, and she's actually developed a program for teaching worldview to kids, which, by the way, is not easy. Okay, I do all kinds of thinking biblically stuff, but the idea of teaching it to like kids under like 10, under 7, like this starts to get a lot more difficult, and you have a special skill set. That's why we brought you on here. So please continue.
Yes. And so usually the older the child is when we start to work with them on this, just the more deeply ingrained it is and the more reformative work that we have to do. Where if we can begin with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds about thinking about the concept of truth, we can be much more formational rather than reformational in our work. And a lot of times as Christians, it's tricky to cover this concept of truth because truth isn't necessarily outlined directly in Scripture. It's just everywhere assumed, just because up, 150 years ago, no matter what worldview you adhered to, you thought that truth was true for everyone, that truth was objective, that there were absolute truths out there. Where now our culture just believes something so completely different. So a lot of times all we do is we have our kids memorize John 14:6. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. We're like, okay, there, we did it. We covered truth with kids. When we look at that passage, Jesus is talking about him being a true representation of who God is, because he is God. He's showing his disciples who the Father is. But then when we stop and think about it and think like, okay, well, what is truth? How do I actually get my kids to understand that truth is objective? That what we need to do is we need to help them discern the difference between objective truths and subjective preferences. And, those of you who are into the world of theology and apologetics and philosophy, you probably know the correspondence theory of truth backwards and forwards, or this might be a new thing for you, that truth is that which corresponds with reality. And, you say that to a 5-year-old and like, you might as well have been speaking in a foreign language to them.
Good luck.
But if we can break it down in really simple terms and just say truth is what is real. Truth is what is real. That's what it means for something to line up with reality. And with little kids, if you can get their bodies involved, that's a great thing. And just have them, lift up their arms and shout truth, every time you say a sentence that's true. For a little bit older kids, it's great just to do a practical activity that can help them see that truth is what is real. Usually what I'll do with kids is, if I'm working with younger kids, I'll send them out on a treasure hunt and I'll give them directions, usually hide like candy or chocolate somewhere around, and say, okay, I have a couple different sets of directions. Your set of directions might be true directions, or your set of directions might not be true directions. Let's see what happens. And then, all the kids go out and only one group of them finds the treasure or the prize, because only one set of directions was true. And then debrief and talk about, why didn't everybody find this? Well, let's look at your directions. Oh my goodness, your directions sent you to the completely wrong place. Like, why is that? And so then they didn't show me what was real. They didn't show me the truth, so that kids get the importance of it. If you're working with older kids, you can have them work on a recipe. Just give them a recipe, give one person the correct recipe, other people a recipe that's like completely off, that's going to end up disgusting. And just so that they can see that truth lines up with reality. Truth is what is real. So that's just an easy thing for us as adults to be able to do with kids. But then we want to dive in even deeper, and we want to look at, okay, so is truth objective or is it subjective? And so these terms can be confusing, but I just like to say, think of grammar. Okay, the object of a sentence, if I say Tim kicked the ball is the object. It's outside of Tim, where Tim is the subject. So a subjective claim is anything that can be changed by my preference or my emotions, where an objective claim is anything that it doesn't matter what I think, feel, or believe about it, it can't be changed. So like an easy activity, I say bake cookies with kids, or, so anything that they'll enjoy, and then talk about what are some things about these cookies that are preferences. Like I'll always give kids the example, I'm super weird. I don't like chocolate. Like if it's a choice between chocolate and broccoli, like I'm going to choose the broccoli every time, which I know
very
is
disappointing.
I know, I'm so sorry. My mom's like, I don't know how you're my daughter. But I'll tell kids, like these chocolate chip cookies, like I would say, ew, gross. Like that's my subjective preference about it. Or you might say yum, or you might say they're too small, they're too big, and just come up with a list of things. What are things about these cookies that are preferences? They're going to change from person to person. And then write a list of what are things that are objective, that are not going to change. Like my mom is severely allergic to gluten. And no matter how much she might think, feel, or believe that certain cookies don't have gluten in them, her preference, her feelings, her beliefs don't change the fact either the cookies have gluten or they don't. Like she can't internally change that.
That's a great example.
So that's just a great way to get kids to start thinking, okay, what is something that's objective? What's something that's subjective? And then we can just begin in our everyday conversations. Oh, like we're talking about this movie, like this decision that the character made, or like this claim, this scientific claim, or, like what you're learning in math. Is that something that's objective? Like it's either true or it's false, or is it subjective? Like your beliefs can change it. And this is so foundational and so important.
So wait, help us grab how important this is, because maybe give us some examples of, if a kid falls for this, if I feel it must be true, how does that affect their views of things like God, religion, other things that, when the rubber meets the road, what are the symptoms of the wrong thinking here?
Yeah, that's a great question, because this is a lot of times why we don't even realize it, because sometimes the symptoms are very subtle and they might not rise to the surface until we actually have an intentional question. And so one thing that will just automatically arise out of this is just the belief that the Bible is true for some people and not for others, or Christianity is true for some people and not others, and not really understanding the objective nature of the claims about Christianity. Like Christianity, I don't follow it because it makes me feel good. Like if it's false, like we need to be out of here. It's Christianity is of no value at all if it's false. And then when we think about things like morality, or we think about things like gender and sexuality, or concepts like justice, if our kids just believe, like that all truth is subjective, or that truth changes from person to person, they are not going to believe that there is some kind of objective moral code that we are all required to follow, or that there are certain things that we as humans need to do. And so this is just going to permeate every area of life if we don't actually take the time to directly address it.
Yeah, I heard in a poll that was done not too long ago amongst was it Gen Z, or was it the generation before them, the millennials? Anyway, it was the poll was basically asking them, if are you a Christian? And for those who said yes, I'm an evangelical Christian, they asked them, do you think it's right to proselytize, to tell other people about your faith, to try to convert them, to make them become Christian? And the majority of them said no.
Wow.
And I think that is a subtle symptom of lie number one. That there's this idea of like, well, yes, it's true for me, but I'm going to let you live in your own sort of constructed reality. And this has always really bothered me, but I've seen it forever. Like my whole life, I've seen it where people deal with math in a very objective way. They deal with things like business and school, and everything's objective until it comes to religious values. And now it's all like make-believe. And, and that seems to be like up until the point of death, we act like our decisions matter. And then after death, when we stand before God or whatever happens, depending on your beliefs, you may think something different happens. We suddenly go into la la land where we act like whatever you believe, that's what happens. But we've never thought this anywhere else in life. Like I've never thought with the gluten example that somebody who has a gluten problem could just eat gluten as long as they believe it's not gluten. Then that's fine for them. And so, yeah, this is something that's multi-generational. It's not just today, but it's affecting Christian youth so much more because they're being raised up with more exposure to that sort of thinking. Yeah.
Right. And that's something we'll get into a little bit more later, but if we can help just set this framework of the difference between objective claims and subjective claims, that's one way that we can really help them see suddenly, that in this religious or spiritual realm, it's not everything is subjective, because when we look at Christianity, Christianity makes a whole bunch of objective claims, and it's not just like, oh, well, maybe that's true for you. It's like, no, this is either true or false. And if it's true, I need to stake my life on it. And if it's false, I need to find another worldview. So as you said, so important.
Yeah. Big stuff. So do you find that when you're working with kids on this and you bring these questions and these examples, does it turn the lights on? Does it cause them to say, wow, I get it? And then when they start asking questions about, culturally tense religious topics, are they able to transfer the principles about objective truth over to those issues?
I found that yes, across the board, it does work, that they are able to translate them over. The younger that you start, the easier that it is, simply because they've had less time to absorb this false lie from culture. Like a lot of parents that use my curriculum, especially if they don't start until their kids are older, will write in and be like, okay, I think we're going to have to go through that whole truth unit again because my kid still doesn't get it. Where, parents that start when they're 4 years old, the kids get it right away. There's really no confusion between objective and subjective. And that's something I saw when I used this in my own classroom, that all of a sudden my students were able to translate this into every area of life. Like they would bring a book up to me and be like, hey, like this character just said this, talking about like their decisions didn't really matter if it was different than someone else, because, everything's different for everybody. But oh my goodness, like that's not the way that truth works. And it was so exciting for me to see like, okay, they're taking this concept, this foundational concept we've learned, and now they're applying it to every area of life.
Right. Yeah, there's kind of I don't know if you deal with this specifically, there's kind of this thing that, at least that seems to be the case to me, which is that people feel like belief has like reality making properties. That the fact that I believe something can make it true. And this is, in some of the more word of faith churches, this is kind of a preaching point that I think is, they talk about your faith creating things and all this, and I'm like, oh, please don't do that, because it feeds into the same problem. And then when you encounter people of other faiths, you feel like their strong faith creates the reality of that faith for them. And it's just this whole, contrary-wise, biblically, what you're saying is so true, right? If you're believing it, it better be true, not if you're believing it, it is true.
Right. Suddenly becomes true.
Yeah. 1 Corinthians 15, he's like, if it's not factually true, the faith part doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's a pretty big deal.